A lot has changed when it comes down to job security. Especially in the last year, there has been a huge shift to remote working and a lot of stuff has changed. It has been steadily changing over the past 10, 20, 30 years, but this year gave it an extra push. So in this video, we are going to look at what the future is going to face. Is it going to be really that everything will be outsourced and done for really cheap? Or is stuff still going to stay a lot like it was, with maybe some types of jobs being outsourced or replaced, or even new jobs coming to replace them in the country they're coming from? So when it comes to outsourcing, there are some key factors to be considered. There are of course a lot of factors, but some of the most important ones are stuff like location, time zones, compensation or salaries, legal stuff, tax breaks, company culture, language, and also stuff like loyalty, which is important to some types of companies. So when you think about this, those key factors are important for some companies, but they are really not important for others. So if you look at it, let's imagine the public sector, right? Which depending on the country can make around 5, 10, 15, 20, 30% of the employment from that entire country. So in some cases it is really important for the staff to really work inside of that country, maybe come every day to an office, or even the citizenship can also be really important. For example, if you look at SpaceX is, I'm not 100% sure about this, what type of company and what department it is in the US, but it is, I think, in the defense sector, because of which only US citizens can work for SpaceX. So this is an edge example, but there are a lot of companies that work in a security area where you are required to be a citizen of that country for which you are working for. Another problem are time zones. So this isn't a new problem. This has been solved and done a lot over the past 20 years, but it still is a crucial problem depending on the type of work that's being done. So for example, if you look at an accounting firm that has to finish certain timesheets within, I don't know, 30 days or something like that, of course the time zone is not going to be that much of a problem. But if it's something that has to be done in a live manner, discussed in meetings, it is going to be much more problematic to work with people who are available only for maybe 2 hours in that day, or maybe even not available at all. So depending on the type of company, this can be also a huge problem. The other thing is compensation. When you look at compensation, it really tends to go down in certain countries. Like if you are exporting a lot of your work to Middle East Asia, for example, it's going to cost you 3, 4, 5 times less. But for example, if you're in Europe and a company from Western Europe is exporting certain tasks to an Eastern European company or freelancers or whatever, they're not going to save like 5 times their value. They're maybe going to save like 50%, or in extreme cases, maybe it's going to be double cheaper than what it originally costs. So the saving is there, of course, but you also need to consider that there is a lot of overhead that comes from that, which we're going to discuss later in this video. So there is of course a lot of problems when it comes to legal stuff, because let's take an example here in the European Union. If for example a company from, I don't know, India wants to develop some custom software for a bank in France, for example, and if they first of all have the problem of data sharing. The data is leaving the EU and entering, so it could possibly be customer data, it could possibly be any type of contract stuff that is tied to a certain user or person from that bank. So that is going to be a problem. It's going to be a legal nightmare, and in some cases even impossible to do, which is going to hinder the possibility of development there. So this is just one simple example how this can be really complicated. Then you can add stuff like tax breaks, for example. Companies are getting tax breaks in certain cases if they are maybe employing a local community, if they are paying higher than average salaries for a certain position and so on. I'm not an expert there, but there are a lot of tax breaks for larger companies mostly, for hiring local people, local talent, paying above market rates, and so on and so forth, which is also a problem that falls apart when you're outsourcing those jobs. So there is a lot of legal problems there, and of course, the bigger the company is, the bigger the legal issues are going to be there. If it's a startup that just needs a landing page developed, this is of course a completely other topic than a large bank trying to outsource 10,000 developers to another country. So, and of course there are examples of this being done 10, 20, even 30 years before now, but still there are certain limitations to that. And I don't think that those limitations are going to change too dramatically because of the remote work that's being incorporated mostly in the last year and this year. Then you of course have the problem with language. So a lot of stuff is moving to English and is being done in English, but there are still a lot of things that require really good proficiency in a certain language. For example, if you want to outsource an accountant to the Philippines and you're doing your accounting in, I don't know, German, it is going to be pretty difficult for a Philippine to learn all the laws, all the stuff for Germany, and to master the language in such a way that he can really submit tax returns and tax documents in Germany. So this is just one example. Of course, there is a lot of stuff about bookkeeping and payroll that can be outsourced to software or people, but still I don't think it's going to change too dramatically because of the increased remote work in 2020. Then there is of course the factor of skill. A lot of people talk about that you can't get the skill of people in a certain region which you could maybe get locally, which in some cases is true, but what I have experienced is it's not that simple. There is a lot of great talent everywhere in the world, and I don't think it's limited only to higher paying countries. I think it is pretty much evenly distributed around the world, but the problem is in the communication. So someone coming from a different background, works in a different way, can explain stuff differently than someone raised in another part of the globe. So there is a lot of miscommunication there, and that's also the reason for a lot of jobs popping up in the last 10-20 years in the sector of project management, business analysts, outsourcing experts, and so on and so forth, because there is this crucial layer that needs to exchange the communication between the overseas company and the local company hiring the talent. So I don't really think that there is going to be too much of a problem around skill, but then when you think about how much time and effort you need to invest to find the right person, then it becomes maybe a trade-off you need to configure. What do I want to say with this? If you, for example, search for a cyber security expert, and I don't know, locally a cyber security expert is going to be 100 to 150k, and you can find a lot of people somewhere cheaper who can do pretty much the same stuff. But you need to consider that a lot of those people are lying in their CVs, you don't know their background, you really can't prove anything there. So it's going to take a lot of time to find the right talent. So you're going to need to screen a lot more people than you would originally need. And at a certain point, of course, it is beneficial, but in a lot of cases it actually isn't. Especially if the job role that you want to give that person is extremely important and it's maybe risking your entire infrastructure, then it's something you really need to think twice about. So there is a lot of overhead in finding the talent. There are of course a lot of companies specialized, recruiting companies specialized in that area, but still it always depends how important that position is. If the position is extremely important, I don't think a company is going to outsource it that easily, and if it's mostly a manual task, then it's another story. So what I have seen lately, in the last 6 to 12 months, is that mostly larger corporations have been a little bit hesitant when hiring new people and hiring external people, but they are not really looking into expanding so much overseas, while other companies, like startups mostly, and really small companies are looking extremely into outsourcing their work. So, but I think it was pretty much always like that. Maybe it is increased a little bit now. I can't really give you an accurate percentage of that, but it has increased, but not too dramatically. So a lot of stuff happening in the public sector, banking, insurance, larger corporations are pretty much staying the same. They're saving money and holding projects back, which hopefully should be utilized somewhere when times get better. But on the other hand, startups and smaller companies are looking more to outsource simpler roles, especially, for example, in Europe. It's especially the case to Eastern European countries, but that is not something really new. It was always like that. Maybe it increased a little bit during 2020. But you need to consider that most of those companies are looking in the long term to hire local people where they are operating from. So when it comes to the compensation, this is really interesting. Because some really high skill positions are going to be compensated a lot less, but on the other hand, some lower skill required positions aren't going to be compensated less. What I mean by that, for example, if you take as a comparison a really good Python developer who has 10 years experience in Python, he really knows the ins and outs about everything, he can do everything in Python, and someone who is a project manager. The project manager doesn't have a concrete skill like knowing Python, knowing, I don't know, chemistry or physics or something like that. But he's really crucial to the success of the project, and a lot of trust is given to that person, which can't be outsourced that easily. But the Python developer, on the other hand, is a lot easier to replace because it is a certain skill which you can test pretty easily. So you can post a job offering, you can search through a few hundred people, and you can really measure their proficiency in Python. And it doesn't really matter so much how much trust you put in them. Of course, there's going to be a lead developer that needs to oversee this and probably needs to be internal in the company and not external. But what I'm talking about is mostly the lower to mid-tier stuff with a lot of manual tasks. So a lot of tasks that are manual and don't change too much can be outsourced quite easily. So it really comes down to the amount of trust you're giving that person and the amount of creativity involved in the role. So if you think about it, there are a lot of high-skilled jobs. If you look at something like accounting, for example, it is a really high skill and it is not that easy to learn it or get a license for it, but it is, in my opinion, easier to replace it because one accountant isn't so much different from another one. Like one Python developer isn't that different from another one. It is a lot of similar skills there, but the way the person behaves, the way how you work with person, the way the person is motivated, driven, bringing mission success to the entire project, that's the biggest game changer. And I think that's what's going to be paid in the future, and that's what can't be outsourced. But stuff that is manual, easy replicatable, and easy to screen for will be outsourced much more than it is today. And you also have to take into consideration that a lot of stuff is getting automated, a lot of stuff can be done from various locations. So I think that the job market is not going to be as good as it was. But on the other hand, like it was always in history, when one thing gets outsourced, it creates an opportunity for something else. The entire industrial revolution is an example for this. People thought that there won't be anything else to do after machines take over, but actually we have much more work than we had earlier. So you can't tell what's going to happen in the future, but I think that mid-term the job market is going to be a bit worse than it was. But long-term there could be another boom happening, or a completely new sector creating millions and millions of jobs. But I don't think that the pandemic in 2020 will have that much of an impact on outsourcing, and I don't think that it will change that dramatically just because of that. It was on a path and is changing constantly, but I don't think that it's going to be too dramatic of a change. So just a disclaimer, this video is only researched by me, and this is what I think and what I have seen. So take this with a grain of salt. Those informations aren't necessarily correct. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you liked the video. Give me your feedback in the comments and see you in the next one.